the budget for us. And if you have any questions, please place them over here in the chat below. Or if you're watching the Facebook live stream, you can place them in the Facebook chat, and we shall take the questions live. So before I get into the whole discussion on the budget, let me do a quick round of introductions. We have Arindam Goa from Deloitte. We've got Saurabh Kanchan. We've got Purva Prakash, who will talk on taxation, and we've got Mr. Rajesh as well. So can you all hear me? I'm sure you can hear me, and you can.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. All right. So I think let's first take an overall view. What was your view? If I was to first start with Arindam, what was your view overall on Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's budget?
I think I would say all my expectations at least got addressed, because 2-3 clear headlines which we see emerging. One is the government is prepared to continue with its own spending in infrastructure, with the expectation that this will help in crowding in private investment. So that's the first headline for me. Second was the focus on competitiveness, because we have seen the Gati Shakti initiative being called out. And if we look at the underpinnings of Gati Shakti, it's all to improve, to strengthen multimodal transport, so that the cost competitiveness of India improves, thereby attracting more private investment.
Right.
So I think that's the other headline for me. Third is, of course, the importance of private investments. That's got called out in the budget, where specific reference to financing has been made, and various options have been talked about there. Fourth, I think the fact about inclusive development, where right from agriculture to use of digital platforms for health and education, the PM Awas Yojana, the quality of life, Jal Jeevan Mission, water, urban and rural housing, all those have got called out. I'm sure that when we go through the fine print, we will also see that the social security nets, I think that was the other area which got called out in the economic survey. And we have a number of schemes there in terms of PM Kisan and other income support schemes. I'm sure they will also get addressed as part of that focus. And finally, the importance of the state governments in being implementation partners. That, I would say, has got addressed and highlighted, because if we look at the particular scheme which has been there to encourage state governments to make capital investments, the corpus for that, the budgetary corpus for that, has got enhanced from 20,000 crores, or 15,000 crores, to 1 lakh crore. Because if we remember, 30% of the NIP, or the National Infrastructure Pipeline, is under the state governments, is to be implemented by the state governments in sectors like irrigation, urban infrastructure, etc. And this should provide a lot of incentivization for the state governments to participate in the exercise.
Right. If I was to come to Saurabh, on the indirect tax front, there were some key announcements made. So overall, how did you find the budget from Ms. Sitharaman before we get into the specifics?
Right. So on the indirect tax side, broadly there is customs, which is what the union government really works on. The GST focuses, of course, through the council and the state ministers as well. But broadly, the statement that seems to be coming out is that customs, or tax for that matter, is no longer a preferable tax policy tool for incentives. So therefore, phasing out of customs duty exemptions, or whether it is increasing or phasing out of schemes like project imports, or increasing customs duties on capital goods. So customs duties the customs law does not seem to be the right place for incentivizing. Probably other fiscal tools have been recognized for that purpose. On the GST side itself, while there were comments on the buoyancy, which is great. I think a structural roadmap, because if you recall that GST is not a one-time reform. It had to move forward and still has to move forward by bringing in items like ATF or the PAR or the real estate land transactions. So how is that going to progress? How is that going to move? Was an important one. There was a lot of expectation from the industry at large around review of the GST rates. Of course, it's not the domain of the union government by itself, but is there progress on that? What is the progress on the rate committees? So some directional answers on where GST is headed. Are we going to stay with the 28%, or is that going to get rationalized? Some of those answers were missing. Hopefully, they will happen as we go through the financial year. One important point that I would want to also make is on the SEZ side. I think it was reiterating that the law is up for a rehaul, rather an overhaul, which is good. September 30th is the timeline that has been prescribed for it. We are all waiting, and we'll wait and watch, and of course contribute in the process through representations to see what is the outcome of that new SEZ environment that's getting created.
Right. If I was to come to Purva on the personal taxation front, I think one impact would probably be on the announcement on virtual assets and 30% tax coming on transfer of any virtual asset. But overall, I don't think there was much change on the personal tax front for individual taxpayers, was there?
You're right. From a personal taxation point of view, yes, there was a lot of wish list in terms of, certain changes in the slab rates or increasing the deduction and work from home expenditures and things like this, because of the kind of challenging time, with the people have faced in the past couple of years. So those announcements have not been made. But yes, I would say, yes, they have focused towards, certain new measures like, trying to kind of encourage voluntary compliance by introducing that updated tax return, or bringing in clarity on the taxation of the digital assets. So some of those good measures they have taken. So of course one will have to read more fine prints, in terms of how the whole scheme works. So that's good. And then they have also tried to codify, certain COVID reliefs that they had given earlier, that announced earlier for the people. So some of the thing has also been codified into the budget.
Right. And if I was to come to Rajesh, what's your overall view on Ms. Sitharaman's budget, and anything specific that you want to highlight?
I think we were not expecting a significant change on tax proposals, particularly on direct tax side with regard to corporates, because whatever changes that would have to be made had been made over the years. So now we have got a very highly concessional rate of 15% that has been extended to by 1 year for the new manufacturing entities. So that's a good thing. With regard to the retroactive taxation, for some reason, government has not been able to get rid of that problem. I think whatever little issue they have, when they try to clarify that position, it becomes a retroactive taxation. So in a couple of places, it has come up now. One is in relation to the deductibility of cess and in relation to deductibility of expenditure against the exempt income under Rule 14. So these two, again, it's been clarified with the respective date. That means it's going retroactive. So it looks like they're really finding it difficult to address that part of the correction that is required in the law. Other than that, I guess the significant changes with regard to the overseas dividends. Right, that is being received, which was subject to 15% taxation earlier. Now it would be subject to the normal rates of taxation. So I think those are all changes that was in a way expected, but nothing significant that had happened. But I think there was expectation around further incentivizing some of the sectors which are having a very difficult time, particularly whether India would be mature enough to offer carrying backward of losses, right? So that expectation was there, but maybe we are not matured enough to go into those areas where we give back tax money paid by the taxpayers. So maybe that will evolve over a period of time. So today, if companies are incurring losses and if they had made some contribution towards taxes in the past, could they recover? Could they have it adjusted? So maybe during the COVID time it's expected, but we have not reached that stage.
And the reduction in the surcharge on long-term capital gains, what's your reading into that?
Yes, I think that is definitely a beneficial one, particularly with regard to unlisted company shares or with regard to any other transfer of asset. By bringing it down, it makes a lot more sense. Otherwise, we have that 37% surcharge, which is quite high. So I think that's a good change that has been brought in. But overall, there is a debate whether we should have such a high percentage of surcharge. Right, there would be one theory which would say that yes, higher taxpayers, higher income earners should pay more, but we got to have a reasonable tax rate.
And another thing that we were looking at is the disinvestment target. Not too many announcements in this budget on disinvestment. We were expecting something from the on LIC's IPO coming forward. So, what's your view on that, Arindam? If you want to take that. On disinvestment, a general comment?
Yeah, I think, naturally the announcements were all forward-looking and mostly to stress on the positive aspects. Now, disinvestment in particular, I think, we know that the initial target for 2021-22 has not been achieved significantly. In fact, there's a huge gap. But I would say from the perspective of the investor community, they don't typically, my impression is that it's not too much of a sort of an negative perception, because at the end of the day, transaction level issues don't really matter. What is important is that the overall regime, the investment climate, and the regulatory reforms, how they are moving ahead. And we have seen a fair bit of traction in the other private investment mechanisms like asset monetization, like public-private partnerships in certain sectors. So disinvestment is just one of the, of course, one of the channels for mobilizing private investment. And from what we understand, there's a well-defined pipeline of PSUs which have been identified for disinvestment for 2022-23. But maybe I think this time the government did not want to really put too much attention on that. Rather, they wanted to focus on overall private investments, the entire corpus, because at the end of it, if you look at infrastructure in particular, around 20% of the total national infrastructure pipeline is proposed to be funded through private sources. And there are various channels of doing that. Disinvestment could be one. Asset monetization is the other. Public-private partnerships, other area. And then again, there's this entire play around non-core assets, which is government surplus land, which is neither a part of asset monetization, or typically they're also not a part of the companies being disinvested. They're kept separately structured. Right. And that's also a potential area for resource mobilization.
Okay. So there's a question coming in from Shikhar Mishra. Will privatization of banks happen this year? The government has already declared this a year ago. So I guess there were not too many, like we were just talking about, not too many announcements on the disinvestment side. So you think, what's your view on that? Will there be further privatization this year, or is it just part of the ongoing process that was announced last year?
Purva or Saurabh, would you like to take that?
Saurabh,
or Rajesh?
Well, just going back to the point of disinvestment overall, I think, the targets are fairly low. But if you look at even the tax targets that are put out in the budget, there's no, it's not a massive 15 or 20% jump expected. I think there's a growth factor of around 6-7% that has been considered. So therefore, whether it's disinvestment or tax, the expectation on the revenue side is not aggressive. For the FY22-23, and therefore it's a fairly moderated kind of a budget on the revenue side that has been presented. A lot of it probably as we look at it is going to be debt finance, but that's broadly, I think, the note of the budget is that there are no significant or aggressive estimates that are going on the revenue side into the budget.
Okay. For the individual taxpayer, now before the budget, there were so many expectations. Purva, if I could take this question to you, there were so many expectations from people saying that the standard deduction limit might be raised. She might do something to put more money in the hands of the consumer, since we need to get the economy going and there should be more spending. But we didn't see much of that happening. Why is that?
So see, yes, you're right. Because of all that kind of a challenge with individuals face, they definitely wanted some kind of a, relief coming. Either they could have rationalized the slab rates, or they could have increased the standard deductions to given that more money, or even there was a lot of demand or expectations that people had incurred a lot of work from home expenditures. So if the government can give some deduction or some benefit around there, or even for the medical expenses, because people did spend a lot of money and they had cut into their savings, to spend that medical expenditure, health insurance. So this, they definitely expected that this kind of a thing could be, it would be very useful for them to, address their current situation, especially where their income is falling. But yes, we haven't seen that, so perhaps, the government wants to, kind of continue with that same regime, and they don't want to tinker too much into it, and rather address, the issues which may probably, will be more forward looking, in the sense that, or where the need would be there. Like, say, for instance, the surcharge has been capped for all the assets, that's good. Or, sometimes you do find individuals, when they file their returns, there are errors, etc. So they, that can kind of really create a lot of issues for them, challenges, when subsequent litigations happen. So I think she's probably trying to focus more towards that side. And probably that's the way she wants to give a direction towards the, for the individual taxpayers, that, address the needs, be more positive going forward, and look at the real challenges in terms of compliance and other things.
Okay. We have a question coming in from Prashant Singh. He says, how should the government balance growth and inflation? I think growth, we've been looking at what 8.5% is what the economic survey said yesterday. So, and inflation, I think, is estimated to come in around 5 point. Real inflation at 5.6%, if I'm not mistaken. So, how should the government balance this? I think the budget does look forward, the way it has been projected, does come forward as a very balanced, forward-looking budget. What's your view on this, Arindam? Overall?
I think, you are absolutely correct about the growth part of it. On inflation, I think the main concern is due to the rising oil prices. And, on account of global demographic problems or geopolitical problems, these can increase further. Now, that would constrain the government somewhat, because in terms of, its own revenues, which are linked to global fuel prices through the cess, I think that would be a sort of a dampener. That's one part of it which needs to be addressed. For that, I think they probably would need to identify alternate sources of revenue generation. And certain areas which actually come to my mind are, let's say property taxes, where I think our current collections or the quantum which we mobilize as a country is way below any of our comparable economies. So I think that exercise will need to be undertaken to balance any sort of, downtrend in fuel-related collections or in terms of cess due to increasing prices, because beyond a point that may have inflationary impact. The other part which needs to be addressed is the supply side bottlenecks, if any, because that could be the other source of inflation. And for that, I think that's where initiatives like Gati Shakti, initiatives like the logistics, streamlining of the logistics supply chain, and timely procurement from the farm gate, etc. Those are the issues which are material, which I think is a very clear focus area for the government.
Okay. Rajesh, to come to you, there was this whole discussion some time ago before the budget of bringing fuel prices under GST. But I think the government does not want to let go of that income source right now, as we can see that it has worked in its benefit. Do you think this will happen anytime this year? Would fuel prices be brought under GST because of a long-standing demand?
Right. Saurabh, would you like to take that? Yeah.
Yes, let me take that one, Roshan. So yes, the end game for GST is fuel folding in. But there are several other candidates. Like we said, within fuel, you have, ATF, natural gas. which are the strong contenders, before petrol, diesel, and such other conventional fuels come into play. There is power and electricity that needs to fold into this, as well as real estate. So there are several items that need to happen. Fuel, probably diesel, petrol is probably going to be the last entering in, is my sense. Certainly not this year. But like I said, I mean, they would probably be that would be the end game, where these are the final products that are folded into GST. What is missing, and even in this particular budget, was the roadmap. I mean, nobody's expecting that this is going to get done immediately within the year. But right now, there doesn't seem to be a roadmap across these, and even in fact, alcoholic beverages as well. There doesn't seem to be a roadmap of how these are going to fold in, and what's the period of time that's going to come in, for this. So right now, not for this year is the summary answer to your question.
Okay, yeah. Another question coming in is, what is the government doing to raise tax to GDP ratio? Who's going to take that? Because,
I think let me start, and I'll request my other colleagues to supplement. One is clearly, improvement of the tax administration system by leveraging technology. That's clearly happening because we see a clear, distinct improvement over the years in terms of monitoring tax leakages. Moving over to more of self-monitoring or compliance, encouraging that, a trust-based approach, where technology plays a role in prioritizing areas of government intervention. So just like we have a risk-based system for monitoring of financial institutions and banks, similarly, the income tax department over time has fine-tuned the art of identifying high leakage areas and zeroing in on that. And technology is a key enabler. So that's clearly one strategy. The second strategy in terms of improving tax to GDP is trying to bring in more formalization of the economy. Because encouraging or bringing in more SMEs into the financial and banking network, bringing in individuals through the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile into the financial network, so that they also end up contributing in the form of any investments or banking transactions, etc. That's also part of the effort, because the more formalized an economy becomes, experience has shown that the tax to GDP ratio increases. And then again, I was mentioning property tax. Those are clearly areas where we have some way to go. And those are also, I think, areas where the state governments would need to support the government of India, because I think in terms of jurisdiction, it comes under the state governments, which is why probably we are seeing over the last 1 year or 2 years, incentivization mechanisms being factored into as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat or even the budget, where the state government, if it implements a set of reforms around property tax and related areas, they get access to concessional financing. So I think these are some of the mechanisms which have started working, but we do have some distance to cover.
Yeah. No, just to supplement that, the government has been putting an effort to extend the tax base. So though she mentioned that the number of compliances have come down, right, substantially come down. If you see the transactional compliance has gone up, either in form of tax deducted at source, tax collected at source. So there are more transactions getting reported, disclosed, and subject to TDS and TCS. But the forms may have come down, but the activities have gone up on the compliance side. So maybe that is oriented towards increasing the tax base to the GDP, but we have a long way to go. I think 4 to 5% gap, which we have, would have to be addressed, because there's a very small percentage of our population really pays tax, and unless we widen the coverage, it's not going to happen.
Okay. Another question, of course, I think everybody is interested in the tax on virtual assets and cryptocurrency in specific. So someone's saying that by imposing a 30% tax on income from cryptocurrencies, does the government have informally legalized it? So do you think there's going to be no ban? Because there's a whole thinking that there would be a ban on cryptocurrency, and the crypto bill was supposed to come out in this session, but it's been postponed.
Right.
So you think that that now it's legal to trade in any cryptocurrency? That crypto is not going to be banned?
The tax laws are on a different footing, right? So the tax collection would happen on any transaction, whether it's done legally or illegally. And then you have consequential action from other legislation with regard to the transaction undertaken. The first is when you have made some gains, government wants to make sure that the portion of it is being shared. So it doesn't make it legal. So there are very clear provisions. The tax laws are quite clear that an illegal transaction would construe to be a legal transaction, but still can be subject to taxation. So those principles are being followed for crypto. It is only to desist people from undertaking this transaction. The tax is also being introduced to say that you should not be doing this transaction. But if people still do it, then they will first face consequences from tax and then from the other authorities.
Okay. So how is this? Just to clarify, how is it currently done? It is shown as income from other sources, right, in your income tax statement.
Right. So now what she's saying is that it will be treated as it is more like income underreported, right? There is a specific percentage, 30% tax would be levied if you have transfer of cryptocurrency. Today, people really don't transact in India because it's not a permitted transaction, right? So you can't buy products with cryptocurrency technically in India. For example, you can't buy TV or at least through the formal channel. But you can only gift it, or you can transfer it to others, right? So only those transactions are being captured now. When you transfer, it gets taxed at 30%, and then when it's gifted, again, it is being taxed in the hands of the recipient. So that's how it's being taxed.
And that's the one
question. The interesting aspect is around the government introducing the digital currency, Indian rupee. I think that's where it's getting balanced out. Now, gradually, we're pushing for digital currency, which is very different from crypto. So it's not really comparable with crypto because it's a formal currency. But at least there would be enhanced digital activity, and you don't have to worry about these additional taxes and charges being levied on the online transactions that are there today. So I think that's an interesting move. It's a delayed move, but at least it's an interesting move.
Okay, so I guess it's an interesting move to now get people to the digital rupee rather than in any other currency or cryptocurrency of any form.
Or even avoiding credit cards and those transactions, because it's all subject to multiple levies, and government has to support those transactions. And transaction time is also more, right? Completing the transaction cycle is much higher in those transactions as compared to digital, which would be immediate.
Right. So, and another question around on agriculture. Now, this being an election year for some states, the government was expected to bring in more SOPs for farmers, but it's not very apparent in the budget how much has been done. What's your view on this?
I think there are when we finally look at the fine print in the budget, there is likely to be significant outlay focused on agriculture. Because I think we had the finance minister mention the part about I think the figure was, if I'm not wrong, the figure was something like just give me a second. The figure was something like around 240,000 crores for procurement of crops from farmers, and that's a sizable chunk of the budget, which I think even last year it was there. So that's likely to be maintained. That's one part. Second is, as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, after last year's budget, the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund scheme was announced, where there was supposed to be an investment of 1 lakh crores over 3 years. Now, last year, the investment was around 30,000 crores, or maybe it was slightly smaller. I'm sure when we look at the allocations for this year's budget, that's going to find its place in the budget. And that's for farm gate mechanization, which again directly goes into improving productivity. And finally, I think let's not forget that around 10% of the national infrastructure pipeline is on irrigation projects, which has a direct bearing on agriculture. And I'm sure that the other schemes in terms of PM Kisan, which is basically some income, basic income support for farmers, I'm sure the outlays on those, I think last year the outlay was around 65,000 crores. I'm sure those are going to be maintained, if not enhanced.
Right. What's your view on the river interlinking project? Now, there's been a lot of talk about that taking off, and the last couple of budgets also it was mentioned. This budget also it has been mentioned that there's going to be the Ken Betwa project and a couple of other river interlinking projects, which will lead to, they hope, better transport mechanism for the country. What's you think that could actually materialize this year?
Again, I think, Roshan, that would depend on the level of support received from the state governments. Because inland waterways have the potential to make a significant difference to logistics costs, at least in certain parts of our country. But the main issue really is in terms of implementation. Again, it would require steadfast support and contribution from the state governments as well.
Okay. And for MSMEs, she did make a mention of the ECLGS. But is that enough? Because I think the pandemic has had the most severe impact on MSMEs, not the large companies, but more on MSMEs. And business has been affected quite a bit. So how do you see the ECLGS really aiding MSMEs?
Yeah, because I think the announcement which was made, the ECLGS was particularly targeted at certain sectors which have been impacted by the pandemic. Yeah. I think travel and hospitality probably was mentioned. And that is likely to be the primary beneficiary of the additional amount. But, I think the main issue around MSMEs is not liquidity available with the banks. The issue is really how much of that actually finds its way to the MSMEs. And there are problems there because in terms of MSMEs access to banks and then the issue about credit quality, whether we have formal credit registries or how do fintechs, which are, as all of us know, the leverage technology for assessing credit applications, have they been able to make a difference? So it's an ecosystem we are talking about, which needs to fire more. I would agree with that. Because while the government has made the provisions in the budget, it remains to be seen how much of that is making an impact on the ground. That's one part. The second part is access to markets, where again, if you look at government procurement policies, they have now been clearly one of the focus sectors is MSMEs, where the government makes it a point that for certain tenders, percentage is reserved for MSMEs. So that's the other attempt which is being made to really help MSMEs graduate to the next level. So it's a combination of all these which have to really fall into place for MSMEs to really thrive. And the third part is MSMEs experience has shown that typically they do best when they're interconnected with the supply chains of large companies. So the entire concept about, let's say in the auto sector, if you look at the ancillaries, how they grew over time, I think that's the other aspect which needs to be pursued with vigor. For example, when we talk about food processing and we talk about the food parks, mega food parks, which are being set up in different parts of the countries, to what extent are they integrated with the farm gate processes? Because they are, in all probability, MSMEs, because this budget talks about some specific support being made available to the self-help groups, etc., if I'm not wrong. And those are the micro enterprises. So I think the financing mechanisms, support mechanisms may be in place, but the access to markets, the entire ecosystem falling in place, and the larger companies doing their share, that's also equally important.
Right. And another thing that was not really touched upon in the budget, although she has said this last year, and on the semiconductor manufacturing fabs that were supposed to be set up in India, she didn't make a mention of it in this budget, and nothing really for the auto sector. Or do you think that would come later as a separate announcement outside of the budget?
Maybe I think I'll request Saurav to take that on.
Right. So I think on the semiconductor fab side, certainly the PLI program, which is open currently for applications. Maybe this is not the right time to talk about for her as to whether the scheme has been successful or not. She did say that all the PLI schemes, including the recent ones, have been all successful, and investments have come in. She did mention that for the solar modules, the investment outlay has been increased, which was great. But that also means that the expectation that there could be PLI budgets for larger sectors, for other sectors as well. I mean, that in a sense did not show. Which means that either outlays for the other sectors, for example, the auto sector, which has also seen good amount of applications, that budget still remains where it is. The scheme doesn't seem to have been expanded to other sectors as well. Maybe that's work in progress, and we will get to know over the next few weeks or months as that happens. But yes, you're right. So therefore, broadly on the semiconductor side, the outcome of that scheme will be only visible probably a few weeks after the applications have been done and processed. But directionally, where is PLI headed? Are there more such programs? Because remember that PLIs were limited window opportunity for 30 or 45 days for which the application was open. Is that scheme going to be something that the government will go back for other sectors as well? And how will that pan out is not entirely clear at this point.
And I think another mention she did make a mention of was for the steel industry, the rollback of CVD on steel because of the high prices, and also exemption given to steel scrap. I think that's being extended, right?
Yes. So there are those adjustments that have happened for some sectors, but I would imagine when we look closely at the customs duties rehash of the 150 plus items that are being spoken about, we will find that some of the duty rates may have gone up, may have inched up. We will need to go through detailed notifications to see what has really changed. But the statement that she made was that lower tariffs are not really conducive for good domestic growth. And which means that philosophically, we are not headed in the direction of lowering of customs tariffs. In fact, we are headed for increase, maybe not a vertical increase, but of course, and keeping in mind the international obligations, whether it is for ITA-bound products or for FTAs, keeping those in mind, I think that the customs duties will trend up over a period of time. One of the things that was expected on the customs duty side was, increasing the tariffs for the sectors for which PLI has been announced. So therefore, increase the tariffs for the end products so that domestic manufacturing can happen. Maybe it's there maybe they stay in the fine print. I don't know, but no announcement was made. So I'm assuming that it's not that the customs tariffs are being increased, just because they were covered under the PLI. But we'll have to, like I said, look at the notifications.
Okay.
One quick point that I wanted to make, and that's also in relation to incentives, though it's more on the corporate tax side, is the extension of the date for commencement of manufacturing. So earlier the sunset was March 23. It's been extended to 24. So if you combine and read that with the PLI as well, a lot of projects will start to take root or start to take shape now after having applied for PLI, and investments will start to happen. And therefore, it was extremely important that those projects have an ability to expand with a concessional income tax rate, at least as an option. So that is, in a sense, a good move that has come through.
All right. Okay. So I think we're almost out of time. I had to let you all go. So a quick take from all four of you. On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put this budget? I'm starting with you.
I think maybe 8, is what I'll go with.
Okay. And Rajesh, you're on mute.
On direct tax proposals, I think we are not used the opportunity to be quite bold and be innovative. I think we seem to have missed the opportunity. So it's a very muted. There is nothing really for on the direct tax side. So it looks like we have not spent time on that, right? To address the issues that are there. So I would rate it around 5.
Okay. Purva, again, personal tax.
Right. And on personal taxation, yes, a lot of wish list and expectations have not been met. So there may be a little bit of, element of disappointment with the taxpayer, with the household, with the individuals. They were expecting some more cash with them and some help over there. So But so I would say probably 7. I would say because some of the other things which they have picked up, like they're giving opportunity for the taxpayer to if they are making certain errors in their return. That's a good one. That the fact that they have codified the certain COVID reliefs into now the budget, so people will get a benefit when they're getting income tax exemption, when they get say ex gratia payment on account of death or medical expenditure. So that's a good one. And then besides, they have, while they have introduced NPS deduction for the state government employees, to be aligned with the government, with the central government, but they may extend eventually to the private sector. So some of those things, I think the taxpayer should look forward to, and it would be probably more could come in. So 7, I would say.
Okay, so 7 on 10. So we got an 8, a 5, and a 7. And Saurabh, from you, how would you rate this budget?
I would agree with all the panelists, especially Arindam, with the 8 on the policy side. But I think purely on the indirect tax side, again, since the government has stopped using almost, duties and taxes as a tool for benefits, incentives, etc., I think largely from a facilitative point of view, from easing of compliance, the SEZ overhaul that has been spoken about, I think a 7 is a good number. There is a lot that could have been done, especially on the at least on the announcements on the GST rate side. But we'll give it a benefit of doubt because that's another forum and not this forum. So broadly, 7 out of 10 is good for now.
So we've got an 8, a 5, and 2 7s over there. Thank you so much for joining us on Financial Express, and I hope to see more of your comments coming in. We have ongoing coverage of the union budget, lots more reactions coming in. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope we will continue to see growth in the country thanks to this budget. Because yes, as we say, it is a growth-oriented budget, and personally, if I was to look at it, it's more of a realistic budget is what I'd call it. I think the kind of targets that she set out to achieve this year, given the pandemic is still in play, I think we've kind of got a budget that is just going the course. It's not something that's exceptional, but going the course.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye. Right. So that was the union budget being decoded by a panel from Deloitte. Thank you, everybody, for watching this. And I hope if you have any more questions, please feel free to put it in the comments below. We will get our experts to answer them. And if you're watching this on Facebook, please feel free to comment. And as usual, just keep following